Good afternoon, class. This is Mr. Turner. Today we're going to be looking at a short screencast on multinational organizations. You might be thinking to yourself, well, what is a multinational organization? Well, a multinational organization is just really what it sounds like. It is an organization. It could be a business, it could be a bank, it could be a charitable organization, it could be a lot of different things. It's made up of a lot of different countries or nations all working for the same goal. So it's very simple what it is. There are a lot of different types, a lot of different goals. So we're just going to look at just a few examples of these multinational organizations and what some of them do. And then we'll take a closer look at those with some time in class. We're going to start off by looking at the United Nations. We're going to take it back to the very beginning of the United Nations. The United Nations was signed or created in June 26, 1945 and ratified at the first session of the General Assembly of the United Nations in London, October 24, 1945. So the idea for the United Nations sort of grew out of a very similar idea, something called the League of Nations. The League of Nations was a body created after World War I to keep the peace in Europe between those warring countries and help to kind of rebuild Europe after World War I. The main goal was to keep something like World War I from happening again, and that didn't happen, or it didn't work in later on in 1941. World War II began. So the League of Nations failed in its purpose, but the United Nations was created out of that same idea, an idea of a body to help keep the peace in Europe after World War II. What it ended up being was United States, Russia, China, France, and Britain became the permanent members to the Security Council of the United Nations. And 10 other countries serve 2-year periods on the council, and they rotate in and rotate out. So this has been going on since 1945. The 5 permanent members have the right to veto any Security Council decision. So what that means is these five permanent members discuss and debate with these other 10 countries that kind of rotate in and rotate out every 2 years. But those 5 permanent members have the authority or the right to veto those decisions made by the other 10 countries. One of the big keys to the survival of the United Nations was the fact that the United States agreed to become involved. The United States never got involved in the League of Nations, which kind of weakened its support worldwide and kind of was one of the major downfalls of the League of Nations. Today, the United Nations has 192 members that serve from around the globe. There's 5 really major parts to the United Nations. The General Assembly is broken into an Economic Council, the Secretariat, Court of World Justice, Security Council, and the Trusteeship Council. And then the Economic and Social Council is also broken up into other organizations, or kind of works with other organizations that you might have heard of. UNICEF might be one that you've heard of before, the World Health Organization, or a couple of other multinational organizations that work closely with the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. The purpose of the United Nations has changed a little bit over time. After it was originally built, it was more aimed at working in Europe post-World War II. But today the purpose is to bring all nations of the world together to work for peace and development, based on the principles of justice, human dignity, and well-being of all people. So basically, its aim is to make the world a more peaceful and cooperative place. The United Nations is sort of there to step in and try to downgrade some of these problems before they get out of hand. Their first goal is to use nonviolence, but they do have some military force if it comes to that. A lot of these countries that are in the United Nations, they volunteer troops to go and serve in a UN force for a certain period of time from their military force. Gives countries an opportunity to balance global interdependence and national interest when considering solutions for international problems. So what that means is basically it is aimed at helping other countries cooperate, to see how one country depends on another country and how those decisions impact other nations, kind of like how a domino falls. One country makes one decision, it interacts, or it affects a second country, a domino falls and affects a second country, so on and so forth. Headquarters today is in New York City. This land and the building that make up the headquarters are international territory. 6 official languages are Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, and Spanish. There is also a UN European headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, and it has offices in Vienna, Austria, Ethiopia, Jordan, Thailand, and Chile. The senior officer of the United Nations Secretary is the Secretary General, President Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. So again, some of its aims: to keep peace throughout the world, develop friendly relations between nations, to work together to help people live better lives, eliminate poverty, disease, illiteracy, environmental destruction, and to become a center for helping other nations achieve their goals. So it's not just about peace, it's about working with other nations to help those nations achieve their goals. By helping individual nations achieve their goals, the bigger picture of the United Nations and their goals can be more easily achieved as well. Some principles: all member states have sovereign equality, so all member states are equal. All member states must obey the Charter. Countries, again, I mentioned this earlier, must try to settle their differences by peaceful means first. Countries must avoid using force or threatening to use force, but they use a lot of times is sanctions, economic sanctions, military sanctions. The UN may not interfere in the domestic affairs of any country, so that means the UN usually steps in and gets involved when one country is threatening another country. For example, you've probably heard a lot about the threat from Russia in the Crimean area, Crimean Peninsula. This is something that the United Nations has taken a step in to get involved because it's Russia and the threat of force against the Ukraine. If it was just a inter-Russian problem, then the chances of the United Nations getting involved are much less. Some goals: these were written in 2000 with the goal of being reached by 2015. So these goals are set to be updated very soon. Eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, improve maternal health, achieve universal primary education, combat HIV and AIDS, malaria and other diseases, promote gender equality, ensure environmental sustainability, reduce child mortality, and develop a global partnership for development. So all these were goals written in 2000 to be achieved by 2015, and I haven't seen any numbers on these goals yet, but if I had to take a guess, I'd say that the success rate for most of these goals is probably pretty low, especially with poverty and hunger, maternal health, HIV and AIDS, child mortality. Those are some things and some problems that are still very large problems especially in underdeveloped regions of the world. I'm going to look at the World Bank real quick too. So who is the World Bank, or what is the World Bank? The World Bank is not a bank like we would think of, or like a bank like we would use. They are a bank made up of two institutions, and the bank is owned by 186 member countries. So those institutions are called the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development and the International Development Association. The IBRD works in middle income and more developed poor countries, and the IDA works in the poorest countries of the world where they had a per capita income of less than $1,135 a year. What the World Bank does is make loans to developing countries around the world. They make these loans with the goals, the mission to do things like fighting poverty, improve the environment, sustain the environment, share knowledge, help build economies. They do this in order to try to sort of stimulate growth in these countries. They do this, they'll make these loans, and sometimes I guess you want to call it a grant, where they don't have to be paid back at all, with the goal that this money will help kind of spur development in those areas. The World Trade Organization. Who are they? They deal with the rules of trade between nations at a global or near global level. So the WTO, the World Trade Organization, is a place where member governments go to try to sort out trade problems they face with other countries. So again, the goal here is to try to cut down on problems between other nations when trade. When you get to a nationwide or global level of trade, who is there to really step in and help to mediate these problems? You know, countries don't always agree on things when it comes to trade and economics. So who is there to step in and try to help to solve some of these problems? That's the World Trade Organization. They're sort of like I mentioned just a second ago, they're a mediator between two or more countries. For example, to protect consumers or prevent the spread of disease. So they come in and make sure that one country's goods that are being shipped, for example, from China to the United States, meet certain regulations. The United States also, inspects goods coming in, but the World Trade Organization sets regulations and rules as well. The agreements are negotiated and signed by the world's trading nations. So by being a member of the World Trade Organization, you sign this and you agree to these provisions and these legal ground rules for international commerce. The goal is to help trade flow as freely as possible, as much of the time as possible. Free trade, free-flowing trade is important for economic development. The United States economy, for example, or China's economy, for example, or Japan, any of these large countries who play a big part in world economics, when their trade, their economy slows down, then the economy and trade of the rest of the world begins to slow down. You begin to see a depression, not just in that country, but worldwide. So the World Trade Organization is there to make sure that these problems that those countries are facing can be solved as quickly as possible so that trade can keep going and countries' economies don't slow, and then you don't have these hiccups or depressions that you see around the world. Because like I said, once one country feels it, that depression, that hiccup, then it spreads to other countries as well. The World Trade Organization is made up of 140 member countries who participate in, sign, and are bound by these legal ground rules for commerce. So some principles that the World Trade Organization is based on: trade without discrimination, freer trade with fewer barriers. That's important. They want to keep these avenues of trade open, and again, keep countries' economies and trade from slowing down. Once these barriers are put in place and these countries' economies are slowed, then it's like a ripple effect, or again a domino effect, that's felt not just in that country but throughout the world. set predictable trade tariffs. Tariffs are like a tax on trades or imports. So they want to set tariffs at a predictable rate. You don't want to be, or they don't want one country to be gouging another country with tariffs and taxes on imports and exports. They want those to be at a set level so that each country knows what they're getting into ahead of time. It's used to make markets more competitive. By making markets more competitive, I mean that your prices are more competitive. Prices being competitive means that countries have to fight to keep their prices down. People are usually going to buy the more economically priced goods. What I mean is that if there's no competition, countries can charge as much as they want to charge for a given product. And by doing that, that might be good for that country, but at the same time it hurts other countries. It hurts buyers and then it hurts sellers. So by keeping prices at a competitive level, it helps to keep prices down and make trade more beneficial for less developed countries. One of the things that it tries to do is get less developed countries, or what we used to call third world countries, now we call them developing countries, more involved in trade. Trade stimulates those underdeveloped economies and brings more money into the country and also sends more money out. So it's like a cycle. The more money that comes in, the more money those countries have to spend at home and abroad. The International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, I think this is the last one we're going to mention. So who are they? A company or an organization created after World War II, made up of 187 countries. They have a board of governors that meets twice a year to make policy. And their day-to-day operations executive board is made up of 24 members, 24 permanent members. So what do? What's their aim? To minimize the effects of international financial crisis. So they try to help countries increase real income and lower unemployment. So again, their goal is a more specific goal of improving economies, but at a more focused area. To cut down the chances and effects of international financial crisis, like a faltering economy or a faltering, maybe a country basically has to declare bankruptcy. The International Monetary Fund can help to step in and kind of maybe provide, if you want to call it, a bailout for that country. Keep exchange rates stable, so that means what one person or what one country's monetary or system of money is worth in another country's system of money. By keeping that rate pretty stable, it cuts down on things like inflation. And establish a trade currency that all countries will use to trade with other countries. So the major one today is the U.S. dollar. Most countries use the dollar as their base financial currency for trade. The International Monetary Fund is not liked by all countries or all people. Some say the International Monetary Fund will loan money to a country that can't pay their debts, but has conditions that come with the loan. What that does is, by loaning money to a country that you basically know can't pay it back, but instead giving them certain conditions, sort of really gives the IMF a hand in that country or control in that country where they otherwise would not have that control or have a say in areas where they otherwise would not have a say. For example, education, health, building the economy, infrastructure. They give this money with certain government restrictions that government won't spend that money in a certain area, or that it will spend that money in a certain area. So it gives them an amount of control in that country where other countries think the IMF should not be. Another example, they open countries to foreign investment and stop charging a tax or tariff or have quota on certain imports. So they're telling these countries that they have to do certain things in order to get that money, or not really have to pay that money back. Okay, so that's just a real brief overview of a few of these multinational organizations tomorrow in class, and Thursday in class, or excuse me, Wednesday in class. We will be looking at some of these multinational organizations, basically reading a little bit more about them and figuring out what they actually do. So make sure that you complete your note-taking guide. I'm going to upload that note-taking guide. I think I gave you the wrong one in class, so I'm going to upload the note-taking guide along with the link to the video. So make sure you've completed that, and also make sure that you have completed the quiz that goes along with this screencast. It shouldn't be more than about 5 to 8 questions, and those questions will be pulled straight out of this PowerPoint. So I look forward to seeing you in class, and good luck.